Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. It's Wednesday morning, but it looks like there's already a bunch of questions, so I guess there was enough time, so let's just jump in. First up, on Patreon, Darkstar7 said that I had mentioned my plasma TV in the past, and they want to know if it would be worth picking up a true 1080p 3D plasma TV. They don't really need another TV, but it's probably given that 3D TVs are going to be getting harder to find. Is mine a not smart one because they don't really like smart TVs? So would they need to buy a commercial display or gaming monitor to get that feature? So I have a couple of thoughts on this. First, 3D content is really hit or miss, and some people just don't like it. And depending on your eyes, sometimes it just doesn't look right. So it's really something that you got to decide for yourself if it's worth it, you know? And it's something that, like, with CRTs, there is so much content that look better on CRTs because that's what it was designed to be viewed on. But on the flip side, how many things would actually look better in native 1080p, and how many 3D content are you going to enjoy? Now, for you, that could be a lot. For me, that is actually kind of a cool thing to own. But for a lot of other people, they might prefer something like that OLED TV back there from 2016 that also supports 3D. So it all gets scaled to 4K, but it actually has passive shutter glasses, but that should be okay because of the way it scales. It should look, I actually think that looks a hair better than the plasma TV that I had. I loved that, or I still have, and I really do love that TV, but just being honest. So if you're really just looking for a TV that also supports 3D, an older OLED would be a really great choice. Especially if you can get it very cheap. Like mine has no burn-in. It still works absolutely perfect, even though it's 8 years old. So to be honest, though, the second reason I haven't upgraded that one yet is because I really love the fact that it's curved. And I didn't buy it because it was curved. I bought it because it was a super sale floor model that was well over $1,000 off the sticker price. It's almost a half price by the time I got to it. But I ended up really liking the curved effect, and it also has 3D, and you just can't get any of those anymore. No more curved or 3D. The main reason I haven't upgraded is because I just can't afford a brand new OLED, but whatever. Maybe I'll find one in the same thing. Maybe I'll find a leftover C3 or something like that. But so as far as non-smart TVs go, the plasma TVs that I have were technically smart TVs, but they're not all up in your face like the newer ones. Back when those things were, had apps on them when it first started, it was an afterthought. It was TV first, app second. And now I think one of the main reasons why you can get a 77-inch LCD TV for like $350 is because of the advertising, the apps. It's app first, TV second in many cases. So while I do agree with you that I would love to see just a monitor version of that OLED without any of the crap on it, I don't think that's something that would bother you for older plasma TVs, 2012, 2013, something like that. It's my opinion. It might still bother you, but it's definitely not the same. You have to go get the apps. The apps aren't thrown in your face. So do I think it's worth it? If you could find one cheap locally, so you just drive up with your car, you don't need to ship it, you could take a look to make sure the screen's not all messed up. Yeah, if you got the space for it, absolutely. I even, care of Steve from RetroTech's recommendation, got a flat panel moving box that I store it in when it's not in use. So it's actually permanently in a room for now, but at some point I would really like to not use it so I could put it in a storage box and just keep it for whenever I want to have that weird, fun, original 1080p 3D experience. And I think that would be a lot more important when this TV eventually dies, because where else am I going to get my 3D from? I guess I could try to get a 3D projector. I mean, there's a lot of things I could do, but I like it. Same reason I like the few CRTs I have left, and I want to keep them. So, yeah, it was a very long answer to a much shorter question, but I just wanted to give you all the info because I like this stuff, but it is not for everybody. Just like CRTs aren't for everybody. There are so many people listening that are like, yeah, CRTs are awesome. So are classic cars. I don't have the time to screw around with either, so I'm going to buy a retro tank and not worry about this. And there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. So hopefully I just added some perspective. Some fun ones from Dustin Mattison. They were shocked that I never saw the Brady Bunch on TV. I never did. There's just so many shows that I remember that they were shows, but I don't remember watching them ever. Like Silver Spoons. I remember the face of the guy that was in it. I think he was also in Spaceballs as the dad, the king, I think. But I don't ever remember actually watching the show. So I don't know. Also, Dustin said they have some unusual regional foods where they live. There's brain sandwiches at the fair. I've actually had head cheese is one of the things that is basically brain, sliced brain, and it was not good at all. And I'll eat anything, right? I've tried foods from all over the world. So if I say something's not good, it's not because it grosses me out. It's because it's actually not, I don't think it was good at least. So I've tried it and it was just fatty and chewy and weird. And I just didn't see a reason to keep eating it. But Dustin also mentioned that they do peanut butter sandwiches for dipping in chili as one of the things there. Peanut butter goes with so many different things, but I'm having a hard time envisioning peanut and chili, which is strange because in a lot of Indian food, there's lots of different peanuts and peanut sauces and spices, but I don't know. I would definitely try it if I was ever out there, but I'm not sure if that would be my thing. So thanks for sharing the weirdness, Dustin. Next up, Oliver Clare is finishing his absolutely badass setup and had a couple of questions related to routing and how they're going to wire things together. And I did read all of Oliver's question, but just in the interest of everybody's time, I'm going to skip to the actual questions just to get the info out. And if anybody wants to hear more about this, please let me know. First question, can I recommend any particular VGA to BNC cable that would work, or will any option from Amazon work well enough for this use? So you always have to just remember that when you get something from Amazon, eBay, AliExpress, whatever, it could be garbage. However, generally speaking, people that order BNC cables want 75 ohm coax shielded cables. It's specifically why they're using BNC over RCA, which so often I found cables that were like hair thin connectors in there and then just filled with rubber so that it looks like a thick shielded cable, but it's not at all. So it's way safer to just pick up a VGA to BNC cable and expect it to be shielded than an RCA cable. However, if you set all this stuff up and suddenly you're getting, weird color interference, then just you're going to have to test each cable in line to figure out which one isn't shielded. So I can't recommend any particular one, but it's much safer than just grabbing random RCA cables, but you still might run into trouble. Next, to reduce the number of extra cables, are there any SCART to SCART couplers or VGA to BNC couplers I would recommend? For VGA, there should be standard VGA couplers out there that you would never really have to worry about. You just put one end in each side, you screw them down, and you're done. And it's not enough of a distance to create interference. You could run into a bad coupler, so one of the pins isn't connecting or something, but that would be a very easy troubleshoot. Just buy a bag of them, and if any of them don't work, toss it. And once again, just to calm everybody down who gets ragey at me when I say stuff like this, I give you that advice to save you money. I'm not telling you to throw your money in the garbage. I'm just saying buying a really high-end coupler for like $5 each or a bag of 10 for $8 is a lot more cost effective, even if you have to throw one of them away. So definitely for that. SCART to SCART couplers are cheap and easy to find. However, they're often looser, and I've never really tested them for interference. Or I think I've tested the random one I bought and it seemed fine. So I would avoid that unless you need it. But if it really is something that would make your setup a lot simpler, I would, this is going to sound dumb, but I would use some painter's tape. I would just put both SCART cables in, put some painter's tape or bungee cords or something to hold it together, and just run your basic tests. Super Mario World, first level with the blue background. Do you see interference before? Do you see interference after? There you go. It's a very simple real world test. Doing that on a flat panel over a CRT is better though, because it'll show more interference. Next, are VGA to BNC cables normally bidirectional? Yes, absolutely. There is no direction when it comes to that stuff. No, it's not directional. There are weird cases in which you would specifically buy a cable for this purpose, but it wouldn't be in the context of VGA to RGB HV or RGBS. The only thing I will note is that sometimes it's a lot harder to find RGBS cables. So it is perfectly fine to buy a VGA to RGB HV, even if you're only using C-Sync or H-Sync and not using the other one. Just either still connect it so you don't have a cable flopping around. You could cut it off. You could just leave it dangling. It doesn't matter at all. But it might actually be cheaper and easier to get 5 BNC to VGA than 4 BNC, even if you don't need all 5 connectors. And lastly, are the VGA style connectors on the HD15 to SCART wired for audio? No, but there's a 3.5 millimeter jack right there. So it's, you get the VGA style jack and then right next to it, the audio jack. So it'll route it right into the SCART pins correctly for you, but you won't be able to pass it through the VGA side. So you can't do some custom thing like that. And that was definitely on purpose by design, because whenever you're running audio next to video signals and sync, it's so easy to pass interference between them. So and also I've seen a lot of VGA cables where the RGB lines are fully shielded, but nothing else, even if all pins are connected, which kind of makes sense. So it's just better to not do it that way. So if you want to send audio signals from the G SCART to the cross point, you're just going to have to break out SCART and audio and then just kind of send it that way. You would probably get a SCART to BNC cable or a SCART to D-sub cable made, and you would just have the audio broken out as well. That should be it. Let me know if you want more details on that last one, though, because depending on the length, your setup, it might actually be easier to use an open source project and have the opposite of the HD15 to SCART to HD15s made, get really long cables and use it that way. So just remember that the HD15 to SCART is directional. It's HD15 in, SCART out, and it will not work in the opposite direction. Although we finished the design for the opposite one, like when that was released. So I don't know what I think we just keep forgetting to release it. So I'll get on that, but let me know if you need any more. Next up, Old Kid said, to the user wanting a game for the ADC to calibration on the RetroTink 5X, what about Mario Paint? Which is a great idea. And in the video that Old Kid posted, in the description, it said, "This is dumb." That's not dumb. I love stuff like that. That is such a neat way. And sure, if you're designing hardware around a product, no, don't use Mario Paint. Use actual test patterns so you could calibrate down to the millivolt. But if you're just kind of tweaking your RetroTink 5X and you want to make sure you get the level straight, no, that's perfect. That's a great way to do it. So thanks for posting that, Old Kid. I'll leave a link to the video as well. Next up, a question from Evan Majid, depending where you're from. Neither of those might be the correct pronunciation. I'm sorry. I'm trying my best. I never intentionally get these things wrong, unless it's my friends like that idiot Voltar or something. But I always try, so please correct me so I can get everybody's name correct. But the question is it okay to place a console with a hard drive, like the OG Xbox, on top of a PVM? They would like to stack a console on top of their PVM 20L5, but they're concerned if the hard drive could have similar effects on the CRT, such as non-magnetically shielded speakers. So I'm 99% sure you're going to be safe. And the number one reason would be because that's how all older PCs worked. They had their magnetic hard drives next to the CRTs, so the shielding must have been built into the drives themselves. But no matter what, if you're ever worried about this stuff, all you have to do is fire up a color bar screen and then maybe an all-white screen as well, and then just very carefully pick up the Xbox and just move it around your PVM slowly. And if you see discoloration, then there's interference. If you see nothing at all, then you're good to go. Now, that is not scientific. There might still be other things involved, but nobody yet, over the years I've been giving that advice, nobody has corrected me with actually, nobody's corrected me at all. Not even trolls like, "That's dumb because the magnetic field of the space lasers," or something. I've never even been trolled about that before. People, smart people or not, all agreed that that seems to be good enough. And even if there is some interference, if you're not seeing color changes on the screen, it's probably not enough to do damage to the CRT, or at least permanent damage. So once again, if there is actual real science out there that says that's not a good practice, please let me know. But I think while that's a guess, it's an educated guess, and I think it's correct. So I never want to pretend like I know everything, but my gut's telling me that that one's good advice. So I think you should be fine. Always great to double check, even just for peace of mind. But I'm pretty sure that's cool. And I do understand why you'd want to be careful, though. A 20L5 is a very expensive and gorgeous freaking monitor. So good call being cautious around it, but I'm pretty sure you're safe. And anybody else, feel free to chime in if you think it's wrong. Next up, Brentatron has a Raspberry Pi with RGB out that was working perfectly connected to their PVM via a retro gaming cable's SCART to BNC cable, but it won't work on either of their consumer CRTs that both accept RGB. So what could the issue be? So unfortunately, I'm going to need a lot more info about this setup in order to figure it out, because if you're talking about RGB SCART CRTs from PAL, or rarely you could get them elsewhere, but mostly PAL regions, then what cable would you be using? Because you wouldn't be able to use that same SCART to BNC adapter, because those would obviously be SCART TVs. So how are you connecting it? And is it an RGB SCART connection on your TV? Are you mistaking the opposite? Are you mistaking a consumer grade component video YPVPR for RGB? That would certainly be one of the issues. So I need to know which cables you're using, what the connector is on the TV. And you mentioned what Raspberry Pi hat you're using, but the one that you mentioned only outputs RGB via a D-sub connector. So I'm not sure how any of that would work. So sorry for not being able to answer this one, but please chime back in with all of the details and I'd be able to help you out with this one. And it could also be that if you're talking about a PAL TV with a SCART RGB input, that you would need voltage on the line in order to enable RGB mode. So let me know all of that stuff and hopefully I'll get you straightened out next week. Next up, Dr. Lilo is having a weird issue with an RGB SCART setup and a Guncon port for their PlayStation 1. So the way these cables work is you have an RGB SCART cable that also has an RCA jack on the console end that you use to plug in your Guncon port, your light gun. And that way you could have RGB going to your TV and you could just have that little port broken out for sync. Now, the Guncons only need sync. They don't actually need a full composite video signal. So you could technically use Luma or composite video for that. And what I prefer is to have a cable that syncs on Luma, let's just say, and then has a composite video jack as the Guncon port, just for a little bonus as well. Because what if you want to use a consumer CRT with composite to play on, but stream via RGB into a RetroTank or something? I just think that's kind of a cool bonus. And that seems to work okay when connected directly or when connected into a TV and then using the TV's composite output, which a lot of CRTs have composite video outputs for dubbing and stuff like that. So that seems to work. But when it's connected to the full chain of stuff, the Guncon port doesn't work. And the chain of stuff, I'm going to run through it quickly, but I think it's worth running through just so people would understand why this might be an issue. And I'm not making fun of you, Dr. Lilo. I think this is cool, but it is kind of funny. It goes PlayStation to that Guncon RGB SCART cable, to a SCART switch, to a SCART to BNC cable, into an Extron crosspoint, into a BNC to HD15 cable, into an HD15 switch, into an HD15 cable, into one of Tim's adapters that goes into a TV. So a SCART adapter that's meant for consumer CRTs that allows you to have external voltage. So my guess is that chain of things is what's messing with it. And if that's the case, that means that the Guncon port is shared with sync. Now, in a normal scenario, so let's just say you have a sync on composite cable and a composite video breakout. You could not plug that into a consumer CRT to watch video on it at the same time as RGB. However, you absolutely could attach just your Guncon connector. And that's why it's safe to do. Same reason why you could put your Guncon connector in line with a composite jack, because it just doesn't put the resistance on the line to draw more power from the console and to put more of a load on it. So it's totally safe to do it in that scenario. But if it is wired like that, so if that Guncon port is shared with sync, then in this setup, I imagine that either the SCART switch or the SCART to BNC cable that has to have some kind of sync stripper in there is messing with it. So, and I say it has to because if you're going to an Extron crosspoint, either the SCART switch or the SCART to BNC cable has to be stripping sync, or it just wouldn't work with PlayStation because they don't have C-Sync output natively. So if sync is shared with the Guncon port, this is just a guess, but my guess is that whatever sync stripper is on that line is messing things up. So the fact that you have a solution is totally cool. If you didn't have a solution, I would suggest buying another cable and making sure that sync isn't shared with the Guncon port. And a basic multimeter should be able to test this. You should be able to just, an $8 multimeter, just test the signal lines on sync and on that. And if it beeps, then you know it's shared. And if it doesn't, you might still need to open up the SCART head. What if there's a capacitor there or something that, won't beep if there's something in line? But that would definitely explain the issue at least. So very, very cool setup. And I think that'll get you in the right direction. But at the very least, I'm glad you found a solution and it's working for you. 2 questions from John Strom. First, do I know of a recommended capture solution on Macs? So if you're talking about Intel-based Macs, a lot of the stuff that I've recommended will work on those as well. The Live Gamer Bolt will work on that, and that's a great device. It's expensive, but that one's very good. But if you're talking about an M1 Mac, I don't really have any recommendations because I have no experience with it. You would definitely want to check out Epos Fox's channel and see if he's got any recommendations on what to be using these days. And he covers everything from the cheap stuff to the best, so you should be able to find some solution there. And the next question, the VCR they're using for transfer has HDMI output that will work with VHS, not just the DVD side. So are they correct in assuming they should use HDMI output over S-Video or component? No. In almost all cases, that's not going to be a good idea. And here's why. Out of the ones that I've tested, maybe you have some crazy, awesome VCR that I've never heard of before. And if you do, please let me know. But in all of the like DVD VCR combos with an HDMI output that I've tested, all they're doing to get HDMI out is essentially putting one of those terrible composite to HDMI converters in there. There are some exceptions. The Samsung player I have has time-based correction built in. While it is a cheap circuit, it's very similar to what you would find in TVs. It's not terrible, but it's still going to just be a basic, let's get this to your TV type of thing. Whereas if you're going through the Tink 4K, which you mentioned you purchased one, congrats on that, you're going to want it to do all of the work for you. Now, once again, like I said a million times in that video, the Tinks aren't always going to be the best solution for VHS, and there are many scenarios in which you would not want that. However, if you're comparing it to the output of one of those devices, it almost surely would be a better choice. Going to have better deinterlacing options, much better comb filtering. If yours has a time-based corrector in it, maybe, maybe not. But the one easy way to tell would be to try to take any kind of test pattern. And if you have a combo unit, DVD, VCR, maybe copy part of the test patterns from the DVD to the VHS tape, and then record those via the HDMI output, and then record it via component to the Tink, and then record it from S-Video to the Tink, and just watch the scenes from each, save screenshots, whatever, and just do your own testing and see what you notice. And sometimes it's going to be a massive difference. Like in that video, that cheap, crappy Amazon box, like you do not need to be a nerd to figure that out. You don't even need test patterns. You just need 10 seconds worth of footage. By the end of that 10-second shot, the video didn't line up with the audio. So it's like, they dropped signal, it flickered, it was pixelated. Like, it was very easy to tell that that was a terrible solution. So maybe your setup was going to be that easy, or maybe you're going to look at all those and go, I can't tell the difference. They all look the same. And if that's the case, choose whatever's easiest. But I still would lean towards the Tink for mainly just because of all the effort Mike put into making sure that this is going to be a good enough solution, to the point where, it is still a gaming scaler that's been tweaked to work with VHS magnetic tape media. That wasn't its first intention, but if you're talking about that versus a 10, 15, 20-year-old device, I don't know. My gut's telling me you're probably going to get better results from the Tink. And even though its deinterlacing isn't perfect for video signals as opposed to video game signals, I've seen a lot of those devices that have just terrible deinterlacing built in. So you're going to have to run your own tests. And I'm going to demo this. That VHS video I'm making is probably going to have to be broken into many videos because it's going to be like 2 hours long now. And every time I learn something, I realize there's 10 more things I need to learn. So I might break it up into deinterlacing, compression, capturing, comparisons. One video might just be dedicated to comparing different methods like this. But one of the things I'm working on right now is for my Video 8 tapes. How do I know what output to use from this High 8 player that's backward compatible with Video 8? How do I know S-Video would be better or worse than Composite? What if it's like Laserdisc where Composite would actually be better? So that's one of the things that I'm going into showing, and just the simple version is use test patterns. So if you have the patience for that, absolutely do it. But if not, if you're like, no, I don't want to deal with any of that, I have no extra time, I just want to use my Tink for video games and transfer some tapes, I would use S-Video out of the VCR and just let the Tink do all the other work. But that's just my gut. You might want to take the time to kind of go through that. But thanks very much for the kind words. I'm glad that you enjoyed the video, and I hope I didn't just make things more complicated for you. Welcome to my world of nerding. It never gets easy. Next up, Josh Lopez says they finally managed to get their hands on a set of HD Retrovision Genesis component cables and an adapter to use on their Saturn, and now they're in the market for a larger component switch. They've been using the cheap component switch I recommended up until now and wanted to ask if I have any suggestions for the next step up. Altogether, they have 5 component-ready consoles and would love to keep as many possible plugged in at all times. So, great question. You gave me all of the info I needed. I think you just need to decide how many outputs you need at the same time and what cost you want to spend. So it's very easy for me to say, now it's time to upgrade to a G-Comp or the GamesCare component video switch. And both of those are absolutely excellent. I've been using them both for years. There's no issues with those other than they're very expensive. So your other choice would be to find used component switches on eBay and hope that they're good quality. You'd have to run some basic tests. That Super Mario World blue background test is always a great one to run because you know right away, plug it directly into your scaler, make sure you don't have any interference, then go through the switch. If you have interference, the scaler adds it. However, there are other options, and you could go for an Extron Crosspoint. You could still get those pretty cheap, especially if you only need 8 inputs or something like that. You can probably get an 8x4. You can get a big bag of BNC connectors. And same thing as I always talk about with those, don't spend the money on the ones that are $5 each. Get a bag of 20 for like $10 and just expect 1 or 2 to not be sized right and save your money there. Yes, you have to throw stuff out, but whatever. But then you're also talking about an old piece of equipment. Now, those cross points are excellent, but they're a little bit bigger, even the smaller ones, and they're 20 years old. So what type of setup do you want to have? Do you want to just say, I'll spend the extra money, plug in these cables, and be done with it? Or do you want to have a setup where you're like, you know what, I'd rather save $100 and I don't mind tinkering. And if I got to find the Extron RCA adapters for audio, you got to deal with those. If I have to do a cap replacement, that's cool too. Then you could probably save some money and get multiple outputs, matrix switching from the cross points. But generally speaking, if you're on a budget, try good used equipment like that. But just understand that you know what you get with used equipment, or just spend the money and get the G-Comp or the GamesCare component switch. So I'll leave links. I'm not sure if either of those are in stock, but that's definitely what I would suggest. And, if anybody has any other suggestions, definitely let me know. Just respectfully, don't put links in YouTube because they just get deleted by YouTube. I don't delete them. They don't even go into my held for review bin. Comments with links just disappear. So say, hey, the Audio Authority component video switch you could find used on eBay is a good choice. I've actually used those and it was pretty good too. So any suggestions, just kind of spell it out in the comments, but I think that's kind of the direction I'd point you in. Another question from Oliver Clare, and I am going to be completely useless to you on this one. I'm sorry, my friend. They have a question about an Amstrad GX4000 and a C4 CPC flash cart. I've never seen either of those. I don't even think I'd be able to pick one out of a lineup of random old computers and stuff like that. So I know absolutely nothing about those. But hopefully somebody who's listening might be able to help. Basically, they want to know if they use the Backpit Pro ROM cart, will it work with the stock PSU? Or does it have to use a replacement PSU like the C4C PC flash cart? So if anybody knows that info, or at least knows where Oliver might be able to get some answers on that, please let me know. But I'm really sorry. I got absolutely nothing for you on this one. But if a week goes by and you still don't get any answers, let me know. I could reach out to probably Reese would be the first person that I would bother with this, but I'm sure there's a lot of other people out there. And, maybe if you're a fan of RMC, I wonder if their Discord would know, because there's a lot of fans of stuff like that there as well. But my apologies, I got nothing. Next up, Mr. Morrow wants to know if I would recommend using optimal sampling to watch VHS via S-Video on the RetroTink 4K or 5X, or just use the basic generic mode. And I'm pretty sure the answer to this is the basic generic mode is actually optimally sampled to standard 15 kilohertz video signals. I think the issue is that video game consoles go so far off spec, because CRTs of the time didn't matter at all, that you need that optimal sampling to tap into those exact signals, whereas generic sampling is actually optimally sampled for 480i video signals because it adheres to the specs and all of that. Now, that is kind of an oversimplification, and there's a little bit more to it, but I just wanted to explain a little bit more why my answer is no, use generic mode, and I think it's because of that. Now, of course, you could always fire up some color bars if you have them on your VHS tape, and you could tweak the signal that way. You can get good contrast and brightness and make sure that everything's aligned, but that wouldn't be optimal sampling. That would be more like analog to digital conversion and leveling and stuff like that. So, nope, that's why I didn't include any stuff like that in the VHS tank video, because you just wouldn't really need to worry about that. So yeah, somebody feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure I got that one right. Next up, Pharaoh Vern recently became interested in a Sega Saturn and wanted to get themselves a setup that's not expensive but provides a good enough result and outputs through their monitor via HDMI. So they got a Japanese Saturn, Saturn PSU, GBS control, and a Saturn ROM cart, but they're not sure about cables. Would RGB matter, or could they just use composite video? So in the context of what you're saying, you have to have RGB because the GBS control isn't going to accept composite video through it. And if it does, it's through some kind of converter or something that may not give the best results. So if you are using a CRT, my answer would be different, and I'll get to that for in a moment, but you're specifically talking about HDMI. So not only is RGB going to be a much, much better looking solution overall, it's what you're going to have to use to get that on your GBS control. Which GBS did you buy? Did you buy one of the ones that has a SCART input, so you could just plug RGB SCART into it? If not, you might need to get HD RetroVision cables or the component cables from Retro Gaming Cables and use the GBS control's component video inputs. That would definitely work, but you wouldn't be able to use composite video. Now, I'll leave a link to I think the Retro Gaming Cables ones are in stock, but I'll check all of those for you and check the description. Now, if you said the exact same thing, but your goal is to go into a CRT, I would actually say just start with composite and go from there. If most of the content you end up playing has 3D graphics in it, composite video blends those together very, very nicely on a CRT, not so much on flat panels. And then you could kind of just go from there. Or if you just played mostly 2D games on the Saturn, 2D graphics games on the Saturn, then eventually upgrade to a better quality signal, even S-video. But that's not the case with flat panels. You're almost always going to want to get the best output possible, because when you scale to a flat panel, you scale everything, including all of the interference. So composite video on a CRT looks beautiful, but in most cases, not so much on a flat panel. So in your setup, yep, I would just either get RGB SCART cables, or in fact, I'm just going to leave a link to the Saturn section that has all of the stuff linked for you. So if your GBS control has a SCART input, use that. If not, you could try to get component cables, which are essentially RGB to component converters built into the cable, and you could use it that way. But that would definitely be the way you'd have to go for GBS control. But it's going to look great. You're going to be happy. Next up, Joaquin Coelho wants to know if anybody knows good modders in Australia who could repair or mod a Neo Geo AES. They've been looking around and haven't really found anybody, and the last time they tried a local modder for preventative maintenance on their CDX, it ended up broken. Ouch, I'm sorry to hear that. So do I know anybody, or do I know someone who could know? So I don't really know any repair shops. I know quite a lot of people in Australia who mod their own consoles and are more than capable of doing whatever you would need to the AES. I just don't know if they do modding services for other people for whatever reasons. So if anybody listening knows, please just post in the comments. Yeah, go to Johnny at, but don't type in the website. Just explain console mods or whatever else, or Aussie consoles, whatever, but I don't know anybody who does it for a service out there, or if I do, I'm just forgetting. So if I'm friends with you and you have a modding service in Australia, my bad, I totally forgot. But yeah, hopefully people in the comments might be able to help. You could check the Discord server, see if anybody has experience in there as well. But it's a big island. I'm sure we'll find you somebody. Demon Koo's got a question, and I don't think there's a great solution for this exact setup, but I'm still going to try anyway. But you might just want to keep doing what you're doing. So basically, based on the question, it seems as if Demon Koo has a component video-based solution for their consoles that goes into a scaler to a flat panel. But when they want to use their CRTs, they unplug the cable and then plug in a composite video cable to go into the CRT. The way Demon Koo's doing it is essentially the same thing, but I just want to simplify it just to make it easier to visualize. So they want to know how they could make it automated so that it could just go to both and they don't have to worry about it. And they wondered about maybe taking the output of the RetroTink 5X and going to a splitter and then a cheap HDMI to composite box. So that's a bad solution in almost all cases because it's going to take that signal and lower it to 480i, an interlaced signal. And if you're talking about consoles like the Genesis that you mentioned, all of those output it in 99.999% of the time 240p progressive. So you're going to get that weird flicker. You're going to definitely add a whole bunch of latency. It's not the solution that for gaming. If you're talking about like an art project or you just wanted a CRT for show while you're gaming on your flat panel, cool, but I wouldn't game that way. So for your setup, in order to automate that with component video, it's going to start to get really complicated because anytime you convert from a higher signal down to composite, then you're going to need to dial in the correct frequency. So that box that got delayed, but it should be out fairly soon from Retro Castle that has that variable capacitor on it, that would work, but then you'd also need to convert it to RGB because there are no component to composite solutions. So you would then need to get a dual outputting switch like a G-Comp. You would want to run that second component output into a component to RGB converter, into the RGB to composite converter, into that. Alternatively, you could get all brand new cables where you have it custom made so that they sync on RGB SCART, that sync on C-Sync or Luma, depending on the console, and break out a composite video signal separately. But then you're going to have to buy all new cables and switch to RGB instead of component. That would totally work, by the way. Alternatively, you could do sync on composite and then have a dual output switch where one, and that's actually what I'm doing on a current setup, where one output goes into a consumer CRT's composite input, but it's still an RGB signal. It's just RGB with sync on composite video. So the other output is there for plugging into a RetroTink to scale. So there's no good solution. And there's certainly no cheap or easy solution. It's basically redo your entire setup, add a bunch of extra equipment to it, or keep doing what you're doing. So I would suggest just doing what you're doing and save some money and kind of decide in the future how you want your setup to look. But yeah, that's a complicated one. And hopefully I at least added some perspective, but I don't think there's an easy or cheap solution to that one. Well, that's it for this week. As always, thank you so much to everybody who supports, and if you want to ask a question, just ask wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post. The way the services work, I can't really figure out what's a new question on an old post, and besides, I just kind of like scrolling through and answering in real time as if we're hanging out somewhere. And anybody who supports on any service is welcome to do so. Very often, like today, the questions are only on Patreon, just because that's where most of the people are, but wherever you support, this is a giant thank you to you. I really do appreciate you. So thank you all so much, and I will see you next week.